Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'll be talking about 3 paleo-human mysteries, and I'll also discuss a couple of books I've recently written which explore some of those mysteries. The first is a novel. It's been compared to the #1 bestseller, Clan of the Cave Bear, and the other is a children's science book that's been strongly endorsed by the head of the department at Texas A&M Anthropology. Both of them are about what happened when we met up with Neanderthals in Europe 45,000 years ago, which we know actually happened. Let me set the stage. It was 1980 when Jean Auel published her Clan of the Cave Bear, the first of a series that went on to sell over 50 million copies. It was about Ayla, an orphan Homo sapien girl who's taken in by a band of Neanderthals and raised. When she gets older, she's raped by one of the Neanderthals, and she has a hybrid child. Did something like that ever really happen? Did humans interbreed with Neanderthals? That's mystery number 1. Mystery number 2 is huge. It may be the biggest mystery of our cultural heritage. You can see up in the corner there, this is a page from my children's book. You can see Makdu and Nuri mentioned. They are the main Homo sapien characters in both of the books, and they meet up in Ice Age Europe with people, a whole different species of people who had been living in Europe for over 250,000 years. So what's the big mystery? Well, once we show up on the scene, Neanderthals die off quickly, forever. Think about that. A whole human species gone, extinct, shortly after we arrive on the scene. So what happened there? What caused Neanderthals to go extinct? And then the third mystery is, how can it be possible that an Australian Aborigine is more genetically similar to a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Scandinavian than a Bantu tribesman is to a San tribesman, or virtually any African tribesman is to a tribesman from a different tribe? How can that be possible? Well, before I get into those mysteries, let me take one brief sidebar to tell you about the really huge, just absolutely breathtaking discoveries that are being made in anthropology and archaeology due to the study of ancient DNA. That's just genome sequencing of old bones, similar to the genome sequencing many of you have had done with 23andMe and Ancestry.com, that sort of thing. Scientists have done that to thousands of old bones, some of them many hundreds of years old, some of them many tens of thousands of years old, and we're learning amazing things. One noted anthropologist said, we can now tell who had sex with whom and when. And as I said, we're learning amazing things. I think perhaps the best example of that is the tiny little finger bone found in Denisova Cave in Siberia that shocked the world. It was 2010 when researchers were digging there, and they knew Neanderthal bones were in the strata below them, and they knew early modern human bones were in the strata above them. They found 3 teeth and a tiny little pea-sized finger bone. Well, was it Neanderthal or early modern human? They were lucky and got a good DNA extraction from the tiny little finger bone. That's a replica of the bone right there. It's tiny. Was it Neanderthal or early modern human? Well, it was neither. It was a whole new human species we knew nothing about. They called them Denisovans, and Denisovans are more primitive than Neanderthals, and they differ from Neanderthals about as much as Neanderthals differ from us. Well, that's amazing in and of itself. But here's the real kicker. Denisovans have contributed more to the Homo sapien genome, at least in Southeast Asia, than Neanderthals have anywhere. Up to 6% of the Homo sapien genome in Southeast Asia is made up of Denisovan genes. And we knew nothing about them 10 years ago. Well, there are 3 types of DNA, and each one tells us a little something different. Nuclear DNA, that's the one you guys have all heard of. That's the 3 billion base pairs. It's got all your genetic information in it. Mitochondrial DNA is by far the smallest. It's only 16,000 base pairs. But its cool thing is it's only passed from mothers to daughters. Y chromosome DNA is 57,000 base pairs. It's only passed from fathers to sons. So where we're lucky enough to have all these data, we can again learn some amazing things. For instance, sometime between 5,000 and 8,000 years ago, a group from the Central Asian steppes swept through Europe and into Spain, and they replaced nearly half of the DNA of the local population along the way. Well, here's the kicker. They replaced almost all of the Y chromosome DNA and almost none of the mitochondrial DNA. So what was happening? Well, they were killing all the men and they were keeping the women for themselves. Here's a graph that shows some of that. You see that the Y chromosome DNA, you can take that as a proxy for the male population. And you see around 10,000 years ago, there was a steep fall off to a severe bottleneck about 5,000 years ago in the male Y chromosome population. The mitochondrial DNA, the proxy for the female population, you can see its uptrend is unhindered. So this was published in Nature magazine in 2018. Let me just say a few words about it. Nature magazine is one of the most prestigious journals in science. It's probably among the hardest to publish in. Gets the most peer review, the most submittals. The reason I'm telling you that is the thing I tell you next, I think will shock you as much as it did me. These researchers found that at the most severe part of the bottleneck, there were 17 females for every male. That's the amount of slaughter that apparently went on in the male population, and that's the level of detail that we can get from the study of these different types of DNA. Well, many of you have heard of Ötzi the Iceman. He's fascinating. He was found in 1991 melting out of a northern Italian Alps glacier by a couple of hikers. He is by far the best preserved body of anywhere near that age that we've ever found. And there's so many cool things about him. I could spend a whole talk on just him. Scientists did all sorts of things to him. They scoped him, they MRI'd him, they X-rayed him. They found out all sorts of things about him. He was about 45 years old when he died. He had severe arthritis and rotten teeth. He had high technology for the time, a copper axe and furs of 6 different types and all sorts of things. One of the coolest things is he had over 60 tattoos. The oldest clear evidence of tattooing ever found in the world. Well, these tattoos were for therapeutic purposes, not for decoration. The reason we know that is they were little tiny dots, plus signs and lines, and they were all centered on his lower back, his ankles, and his knees. Many researchers believe this is the earliest evidence of acupuncture ever in the world? And if so, it's 2,000 years before we thought acupuncture started in East Asia. Well, that's all interesting, but why did I bring him up into this discussion? Well, 10 years after they found the body, researchers were doing another routine set of x-rays, and one of the researchers said, now wait a minute, what's that over there? It was an arrowhead in his shoulder that had cut a key artery. Ötzi had bled to death, not died of exposure as they previously believed. Ötzi had been murdered. So where does Ötzi fit on this diagram? He died 5,400 years ago at the absolute bottom of the most severe part of the constriction. One of the other most famous set of bones that you've probably heard about is Cheddar Man. He was found near Cheddar, England, where they make the cheese. He died 9,100 years ago. He was murdered as well. His skull was bashed in. So he was on the front edge of the downslope, and Ötzi was at the absolute bottom of it. So it's fascinating to me that two of the most famous skeletons or bodies that we found fit this graph perfectly. More on Cheddar Man coming up. He's fascinating too. All right, well, the first mystery was, did we interbreed with Neanderthals? That was solved, but only recently. In 2010, Svante Pääbo sequenced the nuclear genome of a Neanderthal, and it was clear, yes, we had indeed interbred with Neanderthals, and virtually everyone of European or Asian extraction are anywhere from 1 to 5% Neanderthal, most in the 2.5 range. We got some good things from the Neanderthal, like a greater virus immunity. How important is that these days? But let me just put a caveat in there. Just within the last week or two, that same guy, Svante Pääbo, published research that indicates that some genes we got from the Neanderthals that show up, a set of 6 genes on chromosome 3, make those people that got those genes way, way more susceptible to very serious reactions from coronavirus, from COVID-19. So, but in general, we got greater virus immunity, so more of Neanderthal children made it into adulthood, more of our children do too. The bad things we got from Neanderthals, a lot of them center around that better immune system. Later in life, that immune system can kick in and cause autoimmune diseases like lupus, Crohn's disease. That blew my mind. I have Crohn's disease. I may have very well gotten that from my 3% Neanderthal connection. Type 2 diabetes, how common is that these days? Biliary cirrhosis, and then a couple of things that we don't think are related to the immune system, higher risk of depression and actinic keratosis, little red sun damage spots that people get. I get those too, frankly. Well, so Neanderthals benefited from the first thing. The greater virus immunity allowed more of their children to make it into adulthood, and they didn't suffer from the consequences of these others because, as noted anthropologist John Hawkes said, more than 2/3 of Neanderthals never made it to age 30. Neanderthals, to paraphrase Thomas Hobbes, lived lives that were nasty, brutish, and short. Let me give you a couple statistics in that regard. Excuse me. Virtually every Neanderthal skeleton of any completeness that we've ever found shows physical trauma. Most of them, these guys got beaten to hell. Most of them also show periodic malnutrition or starvation. At Krapina Cave in Croatia, probably the place that's found the most Neanderthal bones of any in the world, portions of 80 individuals have been found. The typical age at death was between 14 and 24. many of those people had markings that they had been eaten by other Neanderthals. We weren't around at the time. Some Neanderthals were cannibals. Nasty, brutish, and short. All right, so getting back to the first mystery, Jean Ahl was correct in her book's premise that we did interbreed with Neanderthals and have viable offspring. By the way, she was way, way ahead of her time. She's a hero of mine. She did, being so far ahead of her time, she did get a couple of things wrong. Her main character in the movie was played by Daryl Hannah, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, fair skin, and the Neanderthals were darker-haired. It turns out that those characteristics were reversed. We were freshly out of northern Africa. We had darker skin, darker hair, dark wavy hair, and dark eyes. Neanderthals who'd been in Ice Age Europe for 250,000 years, well, they were, here's some artist renditions. Pardon me. They were much fairer skinned, probably quite a bit of variation in the hair color, anything from brown to blonde to, certainly there were some red-haired Neanderthals. Some of them may have had blue eyes. Bottom line is they were the fair-skinned ones and we were the darker ones. That's one thing. She also got one other thing wrong. Her hybrid child was named Dirk, a male. And it turns out that the Y chromosome of the Neanderthal likely didn't interact well with human chromosomes and so forth. And most, the couplings between male Neanderthals and early modern human females and male hybrids probably were either infertile or did not survive. Spoiler alert, my book, Mokto and the Mammoth People, also has a hybrid child, but her name is Elka. And Elka means unite in Basque. Why did I pick Basque? Well, Basque is the oldest, it's probably the most similar language to what early modern humans spoke as they entered Europe 45,000 years ago. Basque is the oldest language of Western Europe, and there's genetic evidence for this as well. The R1b haplogroup, and a haplogroup is just a set of genes that sort of defines a clan, set of genes that travels together. The R1b haplogroup originated in the Paleolithic, that's our time frame, and it's carried in 90% of Basque people, only 20% of other Europeans. So I've used almost 20 different Basque terms in my books, besides Elka, and I think it adds an extra layer of authenticity. So that is why I've used Basque terms. Now, the Neanderthals to answer mystery number one, yes, we interbred with Neanderthals, and it's clear, and most of you in the audience out there today have Neanderthal genes in your body. So moving on to the second mystery, why did Neanderthals die out so quickly? And I've put together, well, they suffered a Kodak moment. That's an acronym I put together that we killed some of them, we outcompeted them, we brought disease to them, our larger population absorbed their smaller one, and the climate became much more severe. I'll get into each of these in detail. Okay, the guy in the right picture is Stephen Churchill. He's a Duke investigator. In his right hand, he's holding an atlatl, a spear thrower, with an early modern human type thrown spear. In his left hand, he's holding a Neanderthal thrusting spear. They had those powerful shoulders. They were tremendous thrusters, very powerful. Well, he studied a deep groove on the rib of a Neanderthal from Kabara Cave in Iraq and made a really strong case that it came from a small thrown spear, not from anything that the Neanderthals would have had. Neanderthals didn't have throwing weapons. So we did kill some of them, partly because we had the atlatl and they didn't. We likely outcompeted them for resources, especially like for food. We could hit game from farther away, and we didn't have to get so close and get bashed up like they did. Remember how much physical trauma their bones show. Probably because we outcompeted them for food, we also probably outcompeted them for the best shelters, best flint deposits, and so forth. Well, the D in Kodak stands for disease. We almost certainly brought disease to them. We were freshly out of the tropics of northern Africa, where it's the breadbasket of where diseases start because of so many different animal populations there, and pathogens from them jump to humans. We probably brought diseases like tuberculosis and measles to them. Similarly, Cortez, on his way to the New World, stopped and picked up some African slaves, one of which had smallpox, and the slaves and his crew brought diseases to the Aztecs that took their population from 30 million to 3 million in just a handful of years. So I think something similar probably happened when we met up with Neanderthals. The A in Kodak is absorbed, and our larger population did absorb their smaller one, at least to some degree. We know that because we carry their genes. Now, I mentioned we bring Cheddar Man back into the discussion here. That's the left-hand picture that you see there. He died in 9,000 years ago, as you might remember. The genetics are showing that he still had dark skin and dark hair, even after Homo sapiens had been in Europe for 30,000 years or thereabouts. He had crystal blue eyes. So the eyes apparently lightened up before the other features did. Now, the picture in the middle is a Neanderthal female with blonde hair, fair skin, and apparently lipstick. And then the Neanderthal male and early modern human female in the right-hand picture, you see he's fair skin with reddish brown hair, and she has darker skin and dark hair. Now, I mentioned that there'd be a couple more stories about Cheddar Man. Cheddar Man, even though he was found near the town of Cheddar, England, where the cheese is made, was lactose intolerant. Now, every human at the time was lactose intolerant. We only got the ability to break down lactose as adults a couple thousand years later. One other story I really like about Cheddar Man is when his bones were found, it was on Lord Bath's estate. And Lord Bath wanted to know, was he related to Cheddar Man? Well, he had his DNA screened and he had the local population's DNA screened. And it turns out Lord Bath was not related to Cheddar Man, but his butler, Cuthbert, was. How stereotypical a name is that for an English butler, Cuthbert? Well, Adrian Target, a mild-mannered history teacher that lived a few hundred yards down the road from Cheddar Cave, was a direct descendant of Cheddar Man. So in 500 generations, Cheddar Man's descendants had managed to get a couple hundred yards down the road. I love that. Finally, the C in Kodak is climate change brought on by a tremendously massive volcanic eruption. The Campanian ignimbrite was probably the fourth most powerful eruption in the world in the last 1,000,000 years. And it erupted near Naples, Italy. By the way, that area is bulging again. And right now there's 1.5 million people in the immediate vicinity. It was so powerful, it likely killed a bunch of Neanderthals and our people outright. Our population was bigger and we probably were able to better able to bounce back from it. But moreover, it likely ushered in a decade of volcanic winters. And moreover, it seemed to create a Heinrich 4 event. Heinrich 4 was where thousands of icebergs break off the northern ice sheet and float like little ice cubes along the coast of Europe, chilling an already ice age cold Europe. It got brutally cold. I think it's intriguing that 39,000 years is the last undisputed age we have for Neanderthal bones. So those are the 5 main reasons that I think Neanderthals died out. I'm usually asked at this point in time, Neil, what do you think is the main reason? And if you pin me down, I'd say it was likely us, either disease or genocide, because everywhere we show up in the world, whether it's Africa, a couple of human species died out there shortly after we came on the scene. And then whether it's elsewhere in Europe or Asia, Neanderthals, Denisovans, we think Homo erectus was still around in Asia. They died off. Homo floresiensis in Indonesia died off shortly after we passed through the area. We are very tough, apparently, on the other local human populations, as we were to the Pleistocene megafauna. Up to 70% of Paleolithic megafauna died out in close proximity to when we show up in the scene. Unfortunately, I think that trend, that us being tough on fauna, is still happening today.
Carrie's uses on that call.
Yeah, so...
Are you done?
Well, you can see who's on to bring a participant.
I can hear somebody. So anyway, moving on. So that's mystery number, moving on to mystery number 3. How can it be possible that an Australian Aborigine is more genetically similar to a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Scandinavian than one African tribesman is to another African tribesman? How can that be possible? Well, for probably the first 100,000 years of our existence, essentially all of our genetic diversity was contained by the continent of Africa. There were a few ill-fated migrations out, but none of them seem to have been successful. Sometime between 70,000 and 60,000 years ago, a group made it out, and they were successful. National Geographic says that group may have been as small as 200 individuals with their relative lack of genetic diversity. They populated Europe and Asia. Now, they probably crossed from the Horn of Africa into Yemen. That strait now is 20 miles across, but back with lowered sea levels, it was only 6 miles across. And we're almost positive that early modern humans, these early modern humans at least, had boats. More on that coming up. They probably took a beachcomber route along India and island hopped into Indonesia and made it to Australia. This map says 50,000 years ago. It's probably closer to 60,000 years ago. Now, that last stretch from the southernmost island of Indonesia to Australia was an ocean crossing of 37 miles. These people had boats. They were not dumb savages. They were creative, innovative, smart people. Sometime thereafter, a subset of these people made it probably 15,000 years later into Europe. We know that story. Now, at this point in time, I usually ask the audience, what is the broad area culture, human culture, that has the least genetic diversity? Well, I can't see any answers, but the answer is Native Americans. Think of it this way. A small subset left Africa with their relative lack of genetic diversity. They populated Europe and Asia, and then a small subset of them made it across the Bering Strait, and they populated the Americas. Native Americans have by far the least genetic diversity of any cultural group today. Now, before I leave this subject, I think it's really important for me to say that Homo sapiens are 99.9% similar. And of that 1%, 1/10 of 1% difference, some researchers say that 94% of that remaining difference is just variation among individuals in the same population. So it's a tiny fraction of a tiny fraction that isolates us, that makes us xenophobic about people that don't look exactly like us. I think it's especially important in this day and age to remember that we are all cousins, and really close cousins at that. Well, before I close, let me say a couple of words about my books. Mach and the Mammoth People is based on really good science. It starts with a 4-page author's note that's footnoted to 130 annotated references at the back. I encourage people to read that before they read the book, so that as you're reading the book, you can say, yeah, that's true. That really happened, or something like that really happened. It's just got a lot of really good science in it. I don't want anybody to think that this is a science book. It's just a really fun, good read, and it's getting really good reviews. It's full of action and adventure, sex and violence, drama and love stories, all the good stuff. So, and as I say, it's getting good reviews. You see, California Book Watch, a big organization, said, man, if you like Gene Aul's Clan of the Cave Bear, you're going to relish this book. Mark McDonald, an award-winning New York Times correspondent, called it revolutionary, unique, fascinating, and I love this part, deeply sourced. And then it's getting 4.8 stars out of 5 from the unbiased Amazon Vine reviewers. Let me tell you a little bit. I didn't know what an Amazon Vine reviewer was, but they are the best reviewers. They're unbiased. They don't know me. I don't know them. They're the best reviewers that Amazon has. They're the ones that get, hey, this was helpful. Most, hey, this was helpful clicks on their evaluations. And they're sometimes brutal to people. I was biting my nails waiting for the first one. The first one was Hawkeye's there. He's a guy. This book took some sharp twists and turns, blah, blah, blah. You're in for a wild adventure that's going to leave you stunned when you close the book for the last time. And then just to show that it's not a man's book, Elizabeth B. says, phenomenal. This is an awesome, awesome book. Absolutely brilliant. So 4.8 stars out of 5. Now the book is in 2 parts, and in between parts 1 and 2 are 10 color pictures. This one doesn't happen to be in color, but it's one of my favorites. It's a 28,000-year-old early modern human skeleton found east of Moscow with 13,000 ivory beads, estimated to have taken 10,000 hours to make. I did the math on that, and that's 5 years of 40-hour work weeks. And then they buried him. This was some important guy. I think you're going to like the other pictures, and I think you're going to love the book. I hope you'll check it out. Now, I've also written a children's book. It's a science book, When We Met Neanderthals. Daryl DeRuyter, head of the Department of Anthropology at Texas A&M. And by the way, he's the guy that also has done a lot of the research on Rising Star Cave in South Africa, where they found all those Homo naledi bones of these tiny little brained, size of orange brains, humans that lived 250,000 years ago. They were systematically disposing of their dead way, way deep into this cave. So he said this absorbing book is filled with interesting facts, blah, blah, blah. I think children will find it quite enjoyable. I look forward to reading it to my own. So great endorsement there. It's a colorful picture story of what may have happened when our people met up with Neanderthals. And each page has a science corner fact and usually a picture on there as well. For instance, the oldest musical instrument ever found in the world, a vulture bone flute, found in Germany from about 42,000 years ago. The book has pictures of saber-toothed cats, mammoths, wolves, volcanoes. The kids are loving it. And it's gotten a lot of good comments, 4.2 stars out of 5 from the Amazon Vine folks. A woman sent me this. She said she gave it to her granddaughters. They loved it. They read it 4 times. Great comments through there. One of my favorite comments is the one on the upper right, a great paperback book for an early reader, also good for an adult to read aloud. You will learn a lot. Along those lines, in the last couple of pages of the book have 7 other amazing facts, and I put those in there as much for the adults as for the children. I'm just going to go over 2 of them today. Well, before I get to those 2, let me just mention reader's favorite comment over to the side. This book may very well be the most informative walk through the history of humankind that I've ever read. Really cool endorsement there. Well, the handprints. What's up with the handprints? These are from Argentina, 13,000 years old. The oldest ones are a half a world away in Indonesia, over 40,000 years old. In between, in the caves of Europe, most of those have handprints as well. Interesting things, you see most of these handprints are left handprints. Were these people left-handed? Well, we don't think so. We think they were putting their left hand on, and with their dominant right hand, they were taking a tube of ground up hematite and charcoal and animal fat, and they were blowing the outline of their hand. So that explains the left-handedness here. But an even cooler attribute is that most of these handprints appear to be the handprints of women. Now, how do we know that? In men, the index finger is shorter than the ring finger. In women, they're more equal sized. I usually have to wait during this part of the talk for everybody to look at their hands. Well, so since these are mostly made by women, that brings up a really cool question. How about the artwork nearby, the bisons and horses and mammoths that show up on the cave walls? Were those made by women as well? This is one of the very few images of a woman making a cave painting that's out there. And I think right now you'd have to say it's probably a better than even chance that they created quite a bit of the artwork. Well, the last thing I'm going to talk about is just one more of these other amazing facts, and that is, how did Neanderthals get their names? Okay, well, Joachim Neander was a German theologian in the mid-1600s, and even though he died early at age 25 of tuberculosis, he had written 40 hymns and poems for the church. Some of them are sung in churches today. Praise to the Lord, the Almighty, the King of creation. I won't butcher that anymore, but he was loved by the people, and they named a valley after him. In German, a valley is a Tal, spelled Thal, so the Americanized version is the Neanderthal. Well, workmen 200 years later were digging in the Neanderthal, and they come across some very oddly shaped human bones that they originally ascribed to a deformed Cossack soldier. Well, luckily, Origin of the Species by Darwin was published almost that exact same year, and people realized for the first time, wow, this may be another human species. We may not have been alone on the planet. Think how earth-shattering that was to the people of that day and age. Well, they wanted to come up with a name, and the 2 leading candidates were Homo stupidus, which I think speaks to the level of arrogance of Homo sapiens, and Homo neanderthalensis. Well, luckily, they chose Homo neanderthalensis. And that's all a really cool story by itself. But here's the part that sends chills down my spine. Neander's name, the ancient Greek translation of it, means new man. So unknowingly, they named these Valley of the New Man. How ironic is that? Wow. Well, so that's what I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed it. And thank you for letting me talk about a subject I just love talking about. Both books are available on Amazon. I hope you'll check them out. Also, check out my paleoanthropology posts on Facebook at author Neil Bockoven. It's grown from 0 followers to over 9,000 in just a little over a year and a half. Some pretty cool posts on that. Hope you'll check that out too. I'd be glad to take any questions that you have, and thank you once again for letting me talk.
Hey, Neil, this is Dan again. Thank you so much. Really fun talk and something different for those of us on the RMAG for our normal talks. We do have a few questions coming in, if you don't mind me reading them to you. We have about 5 minutes to take questions. The first question is there any correlation between finding only partial skeletons or remains of Neanderthals and the megafauna that may have roamed at the time? Are there any examples of Neanderthals that have been killed or scavenged by critters?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that I know the answer to that. I would imagine that some of the Neanderthal bones have been altered by later, by either animals that killed them or later scavenging of their bodies. I can't say that I know any outright. I will tell you that I just did a post on an early modern human skeleton found with a bear skeleton in a cave from 14,000 years ago in Switzerland, where they both killed one another, certainly. The bear had a chip of a flint arrow or atlatl shaft in his backbone. The bones were found on top of one another. It's a really cool story. That's one case I know of, but that's much later than the Neanderthals. I don't know of any specific examples of what you asked.
Okay, thank you. Another question, any perspective on our relationship with canines and maybe the success around that?
Yeah, the first book, Mach 2, has a section of that, and that's actually playing a role in my second book, which I'm about 3/4 of the way done with. That's going to be called, well, keep in mind that Neanderthals were cannibals, and at least some of them were very, very seriously, very surely cannibalistic. The second book is going to be called The People Eaters. And in that book, well, in the first book, it talks about how we don't have any skeletons or any evidence of dogs, domesticated dogs, older than about 32,000 years. So that wouldn't make it into the 45,000 year category. However, Pat Shipman has put out a book called The Invaders, really cool book that talks about how we very well may have had domesticated wolves by this time. And so actually, again, a spoiler alert, my next book's going to have a little bit of domesticating of wolves in it.
Okay, thank you. Someone asked here, and maybe you can email Debbie and Kathy and they could help us. Can we get the reference for the Nature article that talks about the bottleneck in the male populations?
Sure, I can give you that. I'll send it to Debbie, and she can maybe mail it out. Would that work?
That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
It was a 2018 article in Nature, but I can't remember the title or the authors right now. So.
Okay. Another question. Which current group of people show the highest percentage of Neanderthal DNA?
Again, it's probably Southeast Asian people, which is remarkable to me. Europeans have about 2 to 2.5% on typically, and Asians have maybe 0.5% more showing up. And I'm not sure exactly why that is, because the Neanderthals were more centralized in Europe. Some of them made it out. They find Neanderthal evidence of Neanderthals in the Siberian cave where Denisovans were found. By the way, in that cave they found Denny. That's their name for a perfect hybrid, half Neanderthal, half Denisovan. What are the chances that we find a first generation hybrid, and they named her Denny?
Yeah. So I have a question for you that I'll throw out here. Is there any evidence of Neanderthal populations utilizing, let's say, the natural resources around them, such as any sort of geothermal events, or I guess what I'm trying to ask is, did we see any of those specific populations being more adaptable and successful to survive through generations because where they were and how they were utilizing the natural resources?
Yeah, I can't think of any specific examples of geothermal, but I'm sure they did to the extent that Europe has much of that. I think that's a little more common elsewhere, but I'm sure they utilized that where they found it. Neanderthals, what we're finding is they were pretty similar in their thought ability, and even though we used bone needles way more than they did, or actually, and they didn't. Even though we had tools that they didn't use, they had some things that we probably didn't have as well, and they were pretty sharp. They were the apex predator in Europe for 250,000 years. That tells you something. Surviving through some amazingly harsh climate and other conditions. So they were creative people as well, and we are closing the gap between Neanderthal innovations and technologies versus early modern human. We used to think there was this amazingly huge gap. Well, the gap is narrowing with discoveries that are being made lately.
Okay, thank you. Looks like we're right at 1 p.m. here. And it actually looks like Jeff May found the link to the article in Nature and posted it in the chat. So Neil, thank you very much for being willing to present today. Very interesting, and we really appreciate it. Debbie, would you like to say anything else?
I was just really wanting to say thanks to everyone for being here. It's one of those things, you know, it's another, we're doing a video thing, but like I always leave these feeling so much more connected to everyone. And I was wondering if you could turn your cameras on if you feel like it. It's always nice to be able to see people. We really miss seeing y'all. So, but we're really happy that we could do this, and we so appreciate you coming.